Tom Weaver tightened his grip on Scout's leash as they reached the restaurant door. He gave a quick glance at the young delivery guy, struggling to balance a stack of pizza boxes. "Hold the door, son," Tom asked, stepping forward and catching the glass door just in time. The young man shot him a grateful nod as he hurried through inside. Tom found a corner booth. Scout slid under the table without a sound, resting his chin on Tom's boot. A few minutes later, a shadow loomed over the table. "Sir, we don't allow dogs inside," the manager said, folding his arms. Tom looked up, keeping his voice even. "He's not just a dog, he's my service partner." The manager shook his head. "Rules are rules. I'm going to have to ask you both to leave." Tom stood his back straight. Scout rose in sync, leash taut. As they reached the door, the chatter in the room quieted, eyes turning toward the man and his dog. Across the street, a group of Marines was already gathering dress blues, sharp in the afternoon light, and they were walking straight toward the restaurant. Tom Weaver adjusted his grip on Scout's leash as they approached the entrance of Fisherman's Catch, the small-town seafood restaurant he'd been meaning to visit for weeks. At 68, Tom carried himself with the quiet steadiness of a man who'd seen his share of storms, both on ships and in life. His silver hair peeked from under a ball cap faded by years of sun, and his dark navy jacket sat square on his shoulders, its cuffs slightly frayed. Beside him, Scout, his yellow Labrador, moved with calm precision, his vest clearly marked "Service Dog." As Tom reached for the door, a young delivery guy came hustling up the sidewalk, arms straining under a tall stack of pizza boxes. Without missing a beat, Tom leaned forward and caught the glass door before it could swing closed. "Hold the door, son," Tom said, his voice low but firm. The delivery guy's surprise flashed a quick nod of thanks as he slipped inside, the aroma of seafood and garlic wafting out into the crisp autumn air. Tom gave Scout's head a light pat and followed them in. Inside, the restaurant buzzed with the soft clatter of silverware, murmured conversations, and the occasional laugh from a corner booth. Tom glanced around, noting a few older couples, a family with two small kids coloring on paper placemats, and a lone man at the bar watching the muted television screen. He chose a small booth in the corner near the window, away from the crowd. Scout moved smoothly under the table, turning once before lowering himself onto the floor, his chin resting across Tom's boot. Tom gave the waitress a polite nod as she set down a glass of water and a menu. He scanned the specials without much interest. He'd come more for the change of scene than the food. Across the table, Scout lifted his head slightly, as if sensing Tom's restlessness. Minutes later, the rhythm of the room shifted. A shadow stretched across the table, and Tom glanced up to see a man in a crisp white shirt and black apron, a manager's badge clipped to his chest. The man folded his arms, his expression already set. "Sir, we don't allow dogs inside," the manager said, his voice flat but just loud enough for nearby tables to catch. Tom leaned back slightly, fingers resting on the rim of his glass. "He's not just a dog, he's my service partner." The manager shook his head. "Rules are rules. I'm going to have to ask you both to leave." For a moment, Tom said nothing. He glanced under the table where Scout's soft brown eyes watched him. With a measured breath, Tom pushed back from the booth and rose, his back straight. Despite the stiffness in his leg, Scout moved with him, leash-taut posture, alert. As they turned toward the door, the low hum of the restaurant softened. Conversations faltered. A child peeked over the edge of a booth, wide-eyed. A teenage boy near the window lifted his phone, angling it toward Tom and Scout as they walked out. Outside, the wind stirred the leaves at the curb. Tom stepped onto the sidewalk, one hand in his pocket, the other wrapped around Scout's leash. Across the street, a group of uniformed Marines had begun to gather their dress blues, sharp against the backdrop of the autumn afternoon, and they were walking toward the restaurant. Tom crossed the street slowly, his stiff leg reminding him of every mile it had carried him. Scout walked neatly at his side, the yellow Labrador's eyes constantly flicking up to check on his handler. They reached a wooden bench by the park, its surface cool from the autumn breeze, and Tom settled down with a quiet sigh. Scout sat patiently at his feet, tail wrapped close, alert but calm. From his jacket pocket, Tom pulled out a sandwich wrapped in wax paper tuna on whole wheat. He split it neatly in half, setting one piece down for Scout. The dog waited, eyes locked on Tom, until the quiet command came. Only then did Scout lower his head, eating with measured, careful bites. Tom took a slow bite of his own, chewing without much thought, his eyes drifting across the street toward the restaurant. The bustle of the Fisherman's Catch continued as if nothing had happened. Through the window, Tom could see the hostess laughing at something a coworker said. Diners leaned into their meals, the murmur of conversation blending with the occasional clink of silverware. No one gave a second glance to the old man on the bench across the street. No one except a teenager at the window phone pressed to the glass still filming. Tom shook his head, slipping a hand into his pocket. His fingers brushed against a small worn photograph encased in clear plastic. He pulled it out, holding it between thumb and forefinger. The image showed a younger Tom, face dusty and eyes half shut, stretched out on a makeshift stretcher. Next to him, a younger scout stood alert. His once dark coat, free of gray ears, pricked the faint outline of a military harness across his chest. Even now, all these years later, the memory of that day flickered sharp and clear. Tom let out a breath through his nose, tucking the photo back into his pocket. His fingers grazed the challenge coin next to it, a gift from a commanding officer long ago. He glanced at Scout, whose head now rested lightly against his knee. "Kicked out again, aren't we, Scout?" Tom murmured, voice low enough that only the dog could hear Scout's tail thumped once. A soft reminder that some things at least hadn't changed. A woman hurried by on the sidewalk, tugging her young daughter along. The girl turned her head wide-eyed, but her mother hissed a warning. "Don't talk to strangers. Don't go near strange dogs." Tom looked down at his hands, rough from years of work, and felt the familiar twinge. It wasn't anger. It was something quieter, resignation. He checked his watch. Time for Scout's medication soon. His fingers brushed the small pill bottle in his pocket. Scout had taken a hit the same day Tom's leg was damaged. They'd recovered together, one step at a time. A city bus rumbled past its side, plastered with a patriotic ad. "Honor our veterans, they fought for your freedom." Tom huffed softly. Sometimes the world honored veterans with parades. Sometimes it honored them by pretending they weren't there. Across the street, the fisherman's catch. Door swung open again. Tom's eyes sharpened. A small cluster of men and women in marine dress. Blues had just stepped out of parked SUVs, their polished shoes tapped across the sidewalk, eyes set straight ahead, walking with purpose toward the restaurant. Tom straightened slightly on the bench, feeling Scout shift beside him. Whatever was coming next, it was no longer just his fight. The door of Fisherman's Catch swung open, the small brass bell above it, jingling faintly. Inside, the lunch rush had thinned, leaving scattered diners and the soft scrape of forks on plates. A teenage waiter leaned against the counter, scrolling on his phone, while the manager, the same man who had sent Tom away, chatted with the hostess near the back. Neither noticed the sound of polished shoes stepping onto the hardwood floor. Captain Alyssa Monroe led the group of Marines inside. Her uniform was flawless blue coat trimmed in red, polished brass buttons, ribbons lined with quiet authority across her chest. Behind her, 4 Marines fanned out in a tight formation, their faces composed, eyes scanning the room. Conversations tapered off. A businessman at the bar slowly set down his coffee. A child stopped mid-chew, mouth half open, watching wide-eyed. The manager turned, blinking in surprise. "Can I help you?" Captain Monroe stepped forward, reaching into her coat and producing a military ID. "Captain Alyssa Monroe, Bravo Unit, 1st Marine Special Operations Battalion. I'm looking for Tom Weaver and his service dog, Scout." The manager's mouth opened, then closed again. His eyes darted to the hostess, then to the remaining diners as whispers rippled through the room. "They left a little while ago." "There was some confusion, I'm sure there was," Captain Monroe said evenly. She tucked the ID back into her coat, then lifted a framed photo from under her arm. In it, Tom and Scout stood together, younger dressed in desert gear, dust caked across their boots. The caption at the bottom read, "Brothers in Arms." She set the frame on the counter with a quiet firmness that made the manager flinch. "Tom Weaver saved 4 men in my unit during an ambush outside Ramadi," she said, her voice carrying just enough to reach the edges of the room. "His dog Scout has more confirmed saves than most combat medics. Scout holds honorary rank in our unit, and together they've earned commendations that some soldiers only dream of." The teenager by the window lowered his phone, cheeks reddening. The woman who had whispered about no dogs in restaurants earlier now stared hard into her water glass. A server froze halfway to a table, still holding a tray of drinks. "You didn't just turn away a customer today," Captain Monroe continued. "You turned away an American hero." She let the words sit heavy in the silence before nodding once to her Marines. The youngest Marine stepped forward holding up his phone. We'll be issuing a notice about this incident to our Veteran Support Network, over 15,000 members statewide. The manager's face drained of color. There's been a misunderstanding. That's the problem. Captain Monroe cut in not unkindly. Respect shouldn't require a resume. With that, she turned on her heel, her unit following in smooth practiced unison. As they reached the door, she glanced briefly over her shoulder, eyes flicking once across the room. We hope you'll reconsider how you welcome those who've served, she said simply, and then they were gone, the door swinging shut behind them. Inside, no one spoke. For a long moment, the only sound was the quiet hum of the refrigerator behind the bar and the faint ring of the doorbell fading into the autumn air. Across the street, Tom sat on the bench, feeling the chill of the afternoon seep through his jacket. Scout shifted slightly at his feet, ears twitching as the Marines emerged from the restaurant. Tom watched brows drawn as the unit crossed the street, their shoes clicking steadily on the pavement. He hadn't expected this. Captain Monroe was the first to approach up close. Tom could see the fine lines around her eyes, the small scar near her temple, and the quiet steadiness in her posture that said she'd seen her own share of hard days. Mr. Weaver, she greeted, stopping just a few feet away, permission to sit. Tom gave a small nod, scooting over slightly on the bench. Monroe sat beside him, the other Marines fanning out, some standing, some crouching near Scout, who sniffed the air, but stayed in place waiting for Tom's signal. We heard what happened, Monroe said softly. Didn't seem right to let it slide. Tom ran a hand over his face, glancing down at Scout. Didn't expect anyone to make a fuss, he murmured. Monroe gave a brief half-smile. You never did. She reached into her pocket, pulling out a small object wrapped in cloth. We were about to ship out next month. Before we go, the guys wanted you to have this. She unwrapped the cloth to reveal a unit coin, polished heavy, its edges engraved with the insignia of Bravo. Unit Tom exhales slowly, fingers brushing the coin surface. He said nothing, just nodded once, his throat tightening. Scout shifted again, tail thumping softly against the bench leg. One of the younger Marines crouched nearby, extended a hand cautiously, palm up. Hey, buddy, he murmured to Scout. The dog gave a brief sniff, then a gentle wag of his tail. Monroe leaned forward, elbows on her knees. We saw the footage, sir. You kept your head high, walking out of there. That means more to us than you probably know. Tom gave a small huff of breath. Wasn't much else to do. Exactly, Monroe said. She stood brushing off her slacks. That's why it matters. Behind her, the teenager from the restaurant approached slowly, his phone now tucked away. He held a takeout bag in both hands, a handwritten note tied under the string. He hesitated at the edge of the sidewalk, shifting his weight from foot to foot. Tom raised an eyebrow slightly. The boy cleared his throat. We were wrong. I'm sorry. He extended the bag awkwardly. It's on the house. Tom took the bag after a moment, giving a small nod. Appreciate it. His voice was even without bite. As the boy walked away, Scout gave a low, contented huff, resting his chin back on Tom's boot. Tom glanced at the Marines, a flicker of humor in his eyes. What do you think, Scout? Should we give them another shot? Scout's tail wagged once, slow and steady. The small group stood there for a beat longer, a quiet moment of understanding between a man, his dog, and those who still remembered what honor looked like. Then one by one, the Marines turned and made their way back to their vehicles, the afternoon light catching on their polished buttons as they disappeared down the street. 1 week later, a new sign appeared in the window of Fisherman's Catch We Proudly Welcome Veterans and Their Service Companions. Below it hung a framed photo, black and white, showing military working dogs across generations, from World War II messengers to the modern K-9 teams of Iraq and Afghanistan. Word spread through town quickly, and by Friday evening, a small crowd gathered outside the restaurant. Tom stood near the edge of the sidewalk, Scout sitting calmly at his side, head slightly tilted. He hadn't planned to come, but Captain Monroe had called and urged him to be there. As the local Veterans Association leader stepped up with a microphone, Tom felt the weight of Scout's steady presence against his leg, the familiar grounding pressure that had carried him through darker days. The ceremony was brief but meaningful. Scout was presented with an honorary medal, a small medallion that read, four-legged warrior above and beyond children. From the nearby elementary school handed Tom handmade cards, crayon-drawn pictures of dogs and camouflage flags and shaky but heartfelt thank you messages. A small boy, maybe 7 or 8, approached carefully, his mom waiting a few feet behind. Clutching a card in both hands, the boy stopped in front of Tom, glancing nervously from him to Scout. "Does he understand when people say thank you?" the boy asked, voice small but earnest. Tom bent slowly, one knee stiff, resting a hand on Scout's head. "He doesn't need the words, kiddo." Tom said, "He just needs to be with the people who remember what he's done." The boy's face broke into a grin as Scout leaned forward, giving a soft sniff at the offered card before settling back at Tom's side. Inside the restaurant, the manager was gone. He'd resigned the day after the Marine's visit, leaving behind a handwritten letter for the owner. In it, he admitted he had misunderstood what service, respect, and dignity meant, and that no rule book could teach what experience had taught him that week. The new owner herself, the daughter of a Vietnam veteran, had since arranged for all her staff to receive training on service animals and the Americans with Disabilities Act. But more importantly, she'd launched something even better, a monthly veterans dinner, where local servicemen and women could gather, share stories, and reconnect with a community that had too often let them fade into the background. Tom and Scout became regulars at Fisherman's Catch. Their old corner booth now bore a small American flag and a plaque that read, "Tom and Scout Bravo, Team Never Forgotten." One evening, as the sun dipped below the hills, the teenage waiter from the incident approached Tom's table, hands stuffed awkwardly in his pockets. "I deleted the video," the boy said, eyes flicking up and then away. "And my brother just enlisted, I guess I wanted to say. Thanks for everything." Tom studied the boy for a moment, then extended his hand across the table. "Be that someone for him," Tom said quietly. As the boy walked away, Scout shifted, pressing lightly against Tom's leg as a car backfired outside. Tom took a slow breath, fingers brushing Scout's head. Around the restaurant, people had paused not to stare, but simply to let the moment pass in respect. Outside, the autumn wind stirred the flag over the doorway, the restaurant's new sign catching the last rays of evening light. Inside, Tom sat back in his booth. Scout at his feet, the quiet hum of voices around them, a reminder that sometimes a small town can learn and remember what it means to stand beside its heroes. Over the following months, the impact of that afternoon rippled through the small town in ways no one had quite expected. What had started as a quiet act of recognition outside Fisherman's Catch soon grew into a larger movement. The monthly veterans' dinners became a highlight on the community calendar. People of all ages showed up, retirees in ball caps embroidered with the names of ships, young men and women in reserve uniforms, and local families who just wanted to listen. At those dinners, Tom often found himself at the corner table, Scout at his side, sharing stories with old friends and strangers alike. One night, Tom was surprised to see the young man who had once recorded him walking out of the restaurant. The teenager approached with less hesitation, now carrying a box of programs for the night's event. "Mind if I set these here?" the boy asked. Tom gave a short nod. "Sure, kid." The boy hesitated, then spoke. "My brother shipped out last week," he said, voice low. "Just wanted you to know I get it. Now, what you and Scout were doing that day?" Tom studied the young man quietly, then gestured to the empty chair across from him. "Pull up a seat." The conversation that followed wasn't about medals or battles. It was about the weight people carry and the small ways they find to keep going. Scout rested under the table, head on Tom's boot, as if anchoring them both in the moment. At the restaurant, change became the new normal. The owner arranged for local veterans to help train the staff on interacting with service animals. The hostess, who once didn't know what to do, now kept a water dish and a small basket of dog treats behind the counter. Families began bringing their children to the veterans' dinners, not just to eat, but to listen. One evening, Captain Alyssa Monroe returned before her next deployment. She and her Marines sat at the long table near the window, raising glasses to Tom and Scout across the room. After the meal, Monroe approached Tom with a quiet smile. "We're rotating out soon," she said, "but the guys wanted you to have this." She handed him a patch, the unit's insignia. Tom ran his thumb over the stitching, the edges soft from wear. "Tell them it's got a good home," Tom said. Outside the restaurant, the autumn gave way to winter. Tom could often be found on his porch, Scout at his side, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The wind carried the smell of wood smoke, the sound of distant laughter from neighbors, and sometimes the quiet jingle of Scout's collar when he shifted his head. The town hadn't just honored a veteran and his dog. It had learned to see them, really see them as part of its fabric. In a place where people once turned away or whispered, they now nodded, spoke, and stopped to listen. And Tom, who had once wondered if there was any space left for men like him, found that the smallest acts of recognition, a door held open, a takeout bag offered a patch passed from one hand to another, could stitch a man and his town back together one quiet moment at a time. Winter deepened, and with it came the quiet routines that Tom had learned to cherish. The veterans' dinners at Fisherman's Catch continued through the cold months, now drawing larger crowds. On snowy evenings, families bundled in coats filled the restaurant. Children clutching handmade thank you cards and old veterans swapped stories near the fire. Tom remained a steady presence in the corner booth, Scout faithfully at his feet. Even when the weather kept others indoors, Tom and Scout made their way through town, sometimes stopping at the park or pausing to chat with neighbors shoveling their driveways. People who once looked away now waved, slowed at crosswalks, and children eagerly asked if they could pet Scout, always waiting for Tom's quiet nod of permission. One crisp February afternoon, Tom sat on his porch, a blanket across his lap and a mug of coffee warming his hands. Scout lay beside him, his head resting on Tom's boot, the steady rise and fall of his chest a quiet reassurance. Across the street, the teenager who had once filmed Tom emerged from his house heading toward the Veterans Center. Tom watched him for a moment before calling out, "Hey, kid!" The young man paused, glancing over. "Tell your brother to keep his head down," Tom said, lifting his coffee in a small salute. The teenager smiled, a little awkward, but genuine. "I will, Mr. Weaver." That evening, Fisherman's Catch was bustling again. A new plaque had been installed near the entrance, listing the names of local veterans past and present, with a simple inscription, "We honor their service." Tom's name was near the top, just above a smaller line that read, "And their loyal companions." Inside, the atmosphere was warm. Captain Monroe had sent a letter from overseas, now framed near the hostess stand, thanking the town for its support. The restaurant's once hesitant staff had become confident hosts, offering water bowls and treats to service dogs without a second thought. Toward the end of the evening, the teenage waiter approached Tom's table, clearing plates with practiced ease. He lingered a moment, then said, "I signed up to volunteer at the VA Center next month. Thought you should know." Tom looked up, a flicker of a smile on his face. "That's a good start," he said simply. As the crowd thinned and the night quieted, Tom rose from his booth, slipping on his jacket. Scout stretched, giving a soft shake that sent his collar jingling. Together they walked out into the winter night, the air crisp and the stars sharp above. At home, Tom settled into his chair by the window, Scout curling up on the rug. He reached into his pocket, pulling out the unit coin, the patch from Captain Monroe, and the photo of his younger self and Scout. For a long moment he sat there, memories threading through his mind. Moments of fear, survival, loyalty, and now a community that had learned to remember. Outside, the wind stirred the flag hanging from the porch. Tom leaned back, one hand resting on Scout's head. He didn't need a parade or a speech, he just needed this. The quiet company of a friend, the knowledge that his story had been seen, and the comfort of knowing that for once, his small town would not forget. As winter slowly melted into spring, Tom and Scout continued their quiet walks through town, but the town had changed. It wasn't just about one restaurant learning a lesson. It was about an entire community remembering what respect and gratitude look like in everyday life. This story reminds us that respect is not a holiday banner or a headline. Once a year, it's in the small gestures, holding a door, offering a kind word, asking a name before making a judgment. Veterans like Tom walk among us every day, and many carry stories and wounds we cannot see. Their service dogs, like Scout, are not just pets. They are lifelines, companions, and silent healers. In today's fast-moving, distracted world where people are often caught up in their own routines, this story challenges us to pause and ask, who am I overlooking? Are we teaching our children what quiet service looks like? Are we modeling the kind of respect that doesn't depend on medals or uniforms, but on recognizing someone's humanity We invite you to reflect and share in the comments below. Have you ever witnessed or experienced a moment when someone stood up for another person's dignity? How did it shape you? Thank you for spending your time with this story. If it touched your heart or made you think, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel for more stories that remind us of the best in each other. And remember, the smallest acts of kindness can ripple across an entire town, leaving a legacy far bigger than we imagine. Let's keep these conversations alive together.